Yeah, so I think the last time I left off, Darius had been beaten for the first time over here at the Battle of Isis in 333 BC. So at this point, Darius is fleeing like a coward, running for his life, and Alexander is left free to roam wherever he wants. So a lot of people are joining his cause, and others are putting up a resistance. So over here, we have a place called Tyre, just on the coast over here, the Mediterranean, and he decides to have a big siege on this because it's a significant fortress. Now, during the siege, what's really impressive is at this point, Alexander actually gained a navy from areas here in Cyprus. So he decides to attack, and he ends up killing like 6,000 people over here, and he crucifies 2,000 in horrible ways and tortures a bunch of people to death because he was a sadistic person. And like always, he sells people into slavery to make some money, and there's about 30,000, ancient scholars say, that are sold into slavery. It's a significant amount of money. And in order to do all this, he had to build a massive land bridge, which probably was an impressive thing. Hopefully I can find a picture to illustrate how impressive this feat was. Not to get away from what I'm going to be talking about, but while he's doing all this, he decides that he needs to do something for his personal character. And while going on a conquest through this part towards Egypt, he decides to make a big sidetrack in his expedition. So while on his expedition, Alexander decides that he wants to visit the Oracle of Ammon, over here in what's present-day Libya territory, which back then is about Egypt, just in the corner over here. So 331 BC, he makes a massive sidetrack. His army probably has no idea what he's doing, and he's about to go into a barren wasteland to do this. So, basically, to give you a bit of background information, there's a myth that Perseus and Heracles had also visited this oracle to receive divine rights to prove their heritage. So, Alexander goes off into this freaking desert wasteland, and apparently it's about 280 kilometers of just nothing, no water, nothing. So this is almost like a suicide mission, bringing an entire army with you. And this is where things get really stupid. And the ancient sources, it's all babble. So what we have being told to us is one guy says that during this apparent wasteland run, it rained, like heavy rain, which provided water and sustenance for the army. And they attribute this to, oh, the divine gods are with us. Something important is about to happen. Also, we get writings from one of his companions, Ptolemy, who states that two talking snakes lead Alexander to the oracle through the wasteland because apparently it's really hard to find this place. Another guy, Aristobulus, says two talking crows lead them. So we can believe these ancient sources and whatever they're talking about. Regardless, Alexander makes his way and finds the oracle of Ammon. And this is where Alexander, by himself, goes into a tent with an oracle, and then he proceeds to come out and say what he says, which all of a sudden makes him a god. So what happens is, he says the oracle tells him that, in fact, his father is Zeus, like the tales his mom would tell him beforehand about the whole alleged, oh, she wasn't impregnated by Philip II, and oh, Zeus is his actual father. Now, basically, this legitimizes his heritage to Zeus, and his father had said that his father was Heracles, so both Heracles and Zeus are his ancestors now. And even Achilles is thrown in there because Olympias, his mom, says she descends from Achilles. So it's just a mixed match of people just saying they come from somewhere and then, oh, you're a god. A lot of the kings did this back then, but Alexander was the one who really exaggerated this. So at this point, Alexander has come out of the tent. He says that this oracle says whatever he says. You have no idea. The guy went in by himself. He probably didn't even speak Greek, so how the hell could he say this? And then Alexander is a god, and everyone just has to accept that. So now Alexander, the god, everyone has to just believe this apparently, is free to roam, and he's looking for Darius, because Darius is still alive. And he ends up catching up to Darius for a second time over here, where they have a battle in 331 BC at Gaugamela. And the battle actually is in Darius' favor. Darius has a lot more troops than Alexander, but yet again, not going to go into the details, Alexander just desolates him for a second time, and Darius cowardly flees again. And surprisingly enough, in 330 BC, he's killed by his own men. Basically, they're just trying to give him over to Alexander, which actually pisses Alexander off, because Alexander feels cheated of a victory. And then Alexander also shows remorse, gives the previous Persian king a very, very large funeral, and proclaims himself basically the emperor of Persia at this point. The whole campaign was to get this guy, and the expedition was that, to just take some treasure and booty on the way. But the expedition continues, which begs to the question as to what was the whole reason for this in the first place if he's telling his people it was to get Darius. Regardless, what I want to bring up is Alexander is now free to roam the Persian Empire and conquer more lands to the east, which he does. In the meantime, there's one event which really shows the character of Alexander, and I can't point to it, it's a little bit far away, but it's going to end up in the very vast corner in about 328 BC at Markanda. Present day, I believe it's called Samarkand, and there's a festival. Well, it's not a festival. It's a drunken party night, let's call it. So Alexander's getting drunk with all of his buddies, and now this includes Persians in his encampment and Macedonians, which is greatly pissing off the Macedonians because they do not like these Persians. One person in particular at this event is Cletus. You might know him as Cletus the Black. And this is where Alexander kills one of his best friends in a fit of drunken rage. To give you an idea of what's going on at this time, a lot of people from different parts, we can't call them countries at this point because they're not countries, but different regions, they're all there at the party. They all want to flatter Alexander, get close to him, nuzzle up and kiss his ass a bit. So to do so, what they do is they start bringing up the fact that the new god Alexander is the son of Zeus, not the son of Philip II. So they're belittling Philip II while bringing up all these issues. And they go as far as to make fun and jokes of battles that were going on and commanders of the Persians who lost. And they even make fun of a specific guy called Spidomenes who had lost a battle. He's a native leader of the Persians, apparently. And this greatly starts to anger Cletus. Now, Cletus was a man who actually saved Alexander's life in a previous battle at Granicus. I keep saying that one wrong. Anyways, in 334 BC, Cletus had severed the arm of a guy that was about to throw a hammer down on Alexander, killing him. So Alexander owed this man a lot, and they were great friends, apparently. Anyways, all the slandering that was going on pissed Cletus off, because Cletus was former army men under Philip II, and Philip II is being slandered. So Cletus comes out and he says, Alexander, if you're not the son of Philip II, you're an illegitimate king. And he starts to praise Philip II. Now this just completely insults Alexander and aggravates him, throws him into a drunk rage. There's a lot of differing accounts of how this goes about, but they all end with the same thing, where Alexander just takes a lance and thrusts it, killing Cletus. Looking like a psychopath with a temperament problem. All the Macedonians are left there to basically justify the killing, because if they don't, Alexander might get them next, maybe, who knows. So Alexander tries to put on this theatrical display of drama in which he's remorseful about it and this and that, but this guy, he just got drunk, killed his best friend. Just like that. And it's enough that the ancient scholars wrote about it. It was really important. So during about the same time that Alexander's killed one of his best friends, there's much more issues going on in his growing kingdom. The issues are his cosmopolitan outlook. He's basically dressing like a Persian all the time, adopting their culture, allowing Persian noblemen to be around him as his companions, which is infuriating and making the Macedonians jealous. And he's also incorporating them into the army structure. This is just basically working towards pissing off his real companions, the Macedonians and the Greek people. And this is where things get really bad. He decides one day he's going to adopt prokinesis in 327 BC. We hear this from the ancient scholar Arian. This process is basically a manner in which you kiss your fingers and you direct it towards a superior being. Now, the Greeks and Persians both share this in their culture, but for the Greeks, this is only done so in the images of the gods. So not living beings, these are superior beings, the gods. For the Persians, it's done towards your superiors. So this could be a king or a satrap, just people above you. So it would be sacrilege if you were to do this for the Greeks. So beginning in 327, Alexander tries to adopt this because I guess, well, he's a living god at this point, and he's just trying to enforce this image, which is complete bullshit. Anyways, so some Persian noblemen come up and they start to do this. This outrages the Macedonians. They can't believe this. This is sacrilege for them. And one of them, named Castaneus, I hope I said that right, speaks up against it. He has a whole speech in which he says, this is sacrilege, this is unjust, you can't do this at all. We will not abide by this. And Alexander is forced to cancel this, and he stops it immediately. And this is where things get a little iffy. Now, scholars differ on this, but basically, during the evening when Cassianius makes this speech, Alexander is doing his traditional thing with his Macedonian brethren, the closest companions. They receive a kiss from him on the cheek or what have you. And when he comes up, Cassianius, to get his kiss, Alexander pretends to be talking to someone, so I guess he's doing this or not minding. This is my interpretation. Might not be completely right, depending on your scholar. And Cassianius goes, oh, I guess I'm not going to get a kiss. And he says the famous words, I shall go away one kiss poorer. And he leaves off. Ancient scholars differ on what happens to this character, but some agree that in about 327 BC, he's later arrested for allegedly conspiring to murder Alexander with some other people. There's a lot of different stories about how this goes down, but it's possible that he was tortured to death. It's Ptolemy who says this, and Ptolemy also says that he was possibly crucified, and this would have been by Alexander's orders. So that proves if you speak up against Alexander, you get killed. Okay, now to come back to the issue of Darius the Third dying in 330 BC. The whole point of this entire expedition basically was to take him out and to just plunder on the way. So Alexander's now facing his full army of people who've been fighting him for many, many years and are looking to go home. So, in 326, over in Ephesus, we are seeing a mutiny. Now, what ends up happening is a lot of the men want to go home. A certain man called Conius ends up being the guy who's going to speak out for them because they're having a rally against Alexander. And basically he has a speech saying that it's finally time to go back, the expedition has done what it set off to do, and we shouldn't go on further. This is where we get to see what I like to call Alexander the Emo. Alexander, and ancient scholars will back this up, has a temperament problem. He has tantrums and acts like a freaking baby. And this is one of the instances which this happens. So Alexander screams out that this guy is a coward. He tells them that I will not force any Macedonians to follow me against their will. Why don't you all go home, and then you tell everyone back home that you've left their king in the midst of enemies. And what he does now is he runs to his tent crying, and he just basically sits in his tent and doesn't let anyone see him for like 3 days, like a freaking emo kid at a high school. So 3 days crying. Alexander believes, oh, if I'm going to stay in this tent, eventually they're going to all feel really bad and they're going to say, no, let's continue this expedition. Let's go east because Alexander wants to start going after India. Doesn't work. Everyone is silent. They all think he's being a baby. And Alexander is basically forced to give in to their demands, and they are going to return home. So the year is 324 BC. Alexander is back, and he's in about the Mesopotamia area. And Alexander decides it's a good idea to marry into the Persians, which wouldn't anger his Macedonian buddies, would it? Just continues to riddle them with this issue. So what happens is he ends up marrying the eldest daughter of Darius III that he had killed. Her name was Thetiteria II. I hope I didn't butcher that. Anyways, she's also known as Barsine. He marries her, and he also marries another woman at the same time called Parysatis, who is the youngest daughter of Artaxerxes III. And at the same time, he's like, oh, I want to commemorate these marriage to these two lovely women. I'm going to force all my friends to marry Persian women against their will. So people like Hephaestion, Seleucus, Craterus, Perdiccas, Ptolemy, Eumenes, like his boys, his companions beside him, they all get forced to marry. There's around, I think, 80 of them, and they have no choice in the matter. He gives them a dowry and pays all the debts off at the same time for his military, so he's doing a great job of like bestowing them gifts and such. And also the 10,000 men under him, he asks for a list of this, who had already taken wives of the Asiatic people or Persians, whatever you want to call them. He also gives them some gifts to try and win over the day. Now, just to give you an idea of how they felt about this, exactly when Alexander died, every single one of them basically divorces these women. I think the only instance of one not divorcing was Seleucus, who ends up taking over an empire here, so he basically had to keep the wife. I'm sure some of them killed their wives too, so this forced marriage was quite a failure on Alexander's part. And this cosmopolitan kind of attitude that he took, which in many ways is respectable, a complete abysmal failure. And he just pissed off his men. So the same year that Alexander forces these marriages on his men, there's another mutiny, and this is the mutiny at Opis in 324 BC. So upon arriving at Opis, Alexander gathers all of his Macedonians, and he dictates that he'd like to send the old and wounded back home. And the way that he says this is he calls them the unfit for service. These people have been fighting with him this whole entire time. A lot of them are veterans, and they are so insulted by this because he's basically saying that they're unfit to fight. And back then, it's a grave insult. So when Alexander believes that, oh, I'm going to give them gifts and send them back home, and then when they're back home, they'll promote the idea to other Macedonians, and then they'll come join the war effort, this backfires immediately. An enormous amount of them are outraged, and they start to scream out in grievances, and basically the grievances are like, Alexander, you're dressing like a Persian, you force these marriages upon us with these Persians, you're acting like a Persian, you have Persians in your court, they're alongside Macedonians, and you're even including them in the army. So they're freaking out, and now Alexander's going to have another temperament tantrum. And this is actually advocate because one of the things that they're chanting is, oh, Alexander, instead of taking us on expeditions since we're unfit, why don't you take your father, Ammon? So they're basically saying, oh, because you went to this oracle who isn't Macedonian, he's some Egyptian guy, oh, you're one of them. Basically making fun of him. So Alexander freaks out, and he starts screaming, and he arrests 13 of the people and has them executed. These are his own men. And he gives a speech. He's like, oh, you guys are so ungrateful. All the things I've done for you. I've led you on this, enormous expedition. We've had so much plundering. And then he does emo kid mode again. He goes into a tent. This time, he doesn't eat for a day because, oh, poor Alexander. Yeah, it's not eating. Oh, and he's crying in his tent. That's really going to get the men to like him and all this and that. This is an abysmal thing. A lot of people notice it. And Alexander proceeds to allow the Persians to see him first, after about 3 days of being this emo kid. What Alexander does is he claims that they're kinsmen now. The special somitiphilakakes thing I was talking about, I probably butchered that. Anyways, the friend-kissing ceremony where he kisses his close companions, he gives it to them. The Macedonians, when they find out about this, are just outraged, because the whole kissing friends thing, which is super weird, whatever, cultures and all that, that makes them jealous. So they run over to Alexander, like, what's going on? How could you do this to us? This and that. They're receiving kisses and we're not. This is like literally their words, I believe. And Alexander proclaims, oh no, you're all my kinsmen. So he kisses them all. And the Macedonians seem to be content with this. Or are they? Ancient scholars will probably throw a few lines here and there, but they were probably on the verge of mutiny themselves and doing something to him. So everything is said and done. All the grievances that have been happening. The year is 323 BC. It's June. We're at Babylon. And Alexander, he's doing what Alexander does best. He's getting drunk. He's having fun. Notably, he's hanging out with a guy called Darius. They're drinking every night. But Alexander, he begins to get a bit sick. And apparently he puts on a big fever. And this happens over a course of days. There's scholars who talk about him having extreme abdominal pains, having chills, the sweats, and he dies. Around June 11th, June 10th, he dies in bed. The greatest emperor of all time, arguably, the guy who conquered such a vast land, dies in bed of illness. Now let's look at this, because a lot of scholars differ on what was going on. A lot believe that he was poisoned back then. So we have ancient scholars saying that possibly one account, and it's unbelievable, is that Aristotle poisoned him and made this poison himself. Because the man I mentioned, Cassinius, who had rebelled against Alexander, was executed, was related to Aristotle. It's impossible. Aristotle wasn't anywhere near this. It's a completely fallacy. Some people also say Cassander poisoned him and what have you. Just for my part, what I would like to take into consideration is the symptoms of his death, which are highlighted by all scholars pretty well back then. You have your chills, your sweats, abdominal pain. These are all the symptoms of an infection, it seems. Now, the University of Maryland School of Medicine in 1998 went on to look into this, and what they diagnosed it as being is most likely typhoid fever, which apparently was just all over the place in Babylon. Like this was happening to a lot of people. So it's quite possible this great emperor died of poop poisoning, basically. Go figure. If you thought he died charging in a bow on a horse, you were wrong. And hopefully in the next time, I'll bring up a few more issues after his death, but I'm not going to go too much into it, just to show you how unbelievable this all is, in the exaggeration. I'm going to talk about how tiny his empire actually was. Who was leading his army? Do you think it was just him, or was someone holding the strings in the background? There was somebody. It's called Parmenion. And how did Alexander administer this great empire he took over? Did he put any effort into the towns he was taking, or did he simply leave them and basically nothing happened? And that'll be on the next part.